Welcome to House Call with Dr. Mac, where you get a real doc with straight talk for the whole you. Community, we have been venturing into the realm of addiction and going through the various layers of this subject. And I don't know if you've been following us for this time, but if you haven't, you can go back to our website, housecallwithdrmac.com. You can listen to all the archive shows and get caught up. I would suggest that you take your electronic notebook or your pen and paper the old-fashioned way and just sit down with these conversations, because we are going through the layers, and this is just, like I said, I believe that this particular series has been nothing but divine appointments. That the experts that have walked through the doors and sat down in the community, along with the guests that have come, have just been phenomenal. And today is no less of far from the truth, because we have the privilege of having Mr. Thomas Moore to come in and sit down in the House Call community. Welcome, Mr. Moore, to the community.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I love to tell the community how a guest arrived in our community.
Certainly.
And so if you'll give me just a moment, allow me the privilege to let our community know how we've been able to connect. Certainly. Because we talk about connecting our health dots, and I like to connect all the dots. I have a friend, Dr. Verletta Bryant, and we've known each other for 20 years now. Okay. From Oakwood College, Oakwood University as it's now named. We're in each other's weddings. I had the privilege of delivering Fifi. She's the only child that can say that Auntie Keisha is the one that she saw first. And I reached out to her because she's been here in the community to talk with us and connect some health dots on human behavior and development. And I said to her, Verletta, we're working on a series on addiction. Could I have you come back and sit down, or do you know of anybody? And she immediately, without hesitation, said, I know exactly who you need to talk to. And we've been introduced, and you so graciously, without hesitation, said, absolutely, I'll come and sit down. And so we thank you for coming to sit down in the community. Thank you very much.
And again, thank you for inviting me.
Mr. Moore, so we've been talking about addiction this month in the house call community. We've talked about tobacco addiction. We had a guest to come in and share her story about cocaine addiction as well. And so what we do in the community is we have individuals tell their health stories. Then we have healthcare providers or other experts come in and give their perspectives. And our mission is that when people hear these stories and the healthcare providers or experts' perspectives, they're able to connect their own health dots and begin to experience whole person care. So in having that little segment and introduction and preamble, I want to ask, how did you start your journey into the realm of addiction, treatment, recovery, and management? If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Certainly. I guess like all stories, and kind of start with childhood. My early memories were of my father. We had a very close-knit family, and my father was alcoholic. And being alcoholic, I can remember a lot of shame and guilt that kind of surrounded seeing him kind of staggering home drunk. And everybody in the neighborhood, including the kids, knew he was my dad. And I remember really feeling shame. But the good part was that even though he was alcoholic, our house was the house where all the kids could kind of come and gather and do whatever. It was my dad and mom that took everybody to the beach. My parents that took us to the carnival. So I kind of got a pass on that. But there still was internal conflict in the house. My dad in stupors could come home and possibly lose the car. And I can remember my mom and dad going back and forth about where he parked the car or him being arrested. Till it got to a point to where we just parked the car in the garage. We had a car that wasn't 3 years old, brand new, and could not drive it. It was parked in the garage because my mom felt that even though my father's license and everything had been suspended, that it wasn't safe to have the car out and functioning, even though she had a license. So we did without the car. And I remember promising myself that I would never, ever be alcoholic. Well, as a result of that, and really kind of still feeling a lot of shame and guilt and insecure in general, going through adolescence, some of my closest friends were athletes, and they were going off to college, actually getting scholarships. And our closest friend had gone to North Carolina and came back, and he actually had heroin. We had already kind of started experimenting with marijuana, so which was okay, marijuana and some alcohol. And I remember trying it. And
trying the heroin?
First trying the alcohol,
okay,
which I did not like, but then the marijuana, and gaining this confidence and this camaraderie among all the guys. Being a little introverted, I found that when I smoked, I kind of became more extroverted, and I would do things. I was no longer standing on the wall. I would dance, and was pretty good at it. I found out that I could do things that I had no idea I could do. So that was kind of like a segue into just the experimental phase, but it became my strategy, my means of kind of getting along with folks, because it seemed like I had confidence that I normally would not have. You hear a lot of alcoholics that drink talk about liquid courage. Well, mine was through marijuana, and so I began to just kind of experiment with other drugs as well. And as I said, my friend came home and he did have heroin, and it was then becoming kind of fashionable. It was the first real craze I remember where everybody was really experimenting with heroin. The guys that seemed to be the coolest, the cars, the clothes, the glamour and everything, all were kind of involved. So, just the whole thing about conviviality, I found myself kind of going in and associating and trying those things. And that was the beginning. Initially, it was just weekends and parties, and which was manageable. And it did not progress. It wasn't until probably my first real job, I was working down the post office, where it was rampant. Yes, at the city post office, everybody, it seemed like all my friends anyway, were experimenting or using drugs or alcohol. So,
it was a culture.
Yes, it was a culture. In fact, I can talk about it now, but I can remember Wade coming into the post office, punching in and going out the back door to go to somebody's house just the continuation of the party.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, as a result of doing that and just kind of partying away at the post office, I didn't do the stuff that I needed to do in order to maintain the job, which was, even though I had been made permanent, we had schemes that you had to memorize, and I did not pay any attention. I didn't like the scheme I had. I had a really difficult one. This was when the perimeter of Washington was really developing. So I had zone 27 and 28, which is like around Temple Hills, and all those streets were developing. So, every week there were new streets popping up, and I just didn't feel like doing it. I
just didn't want to do it.
I just didn't want to do it. It was too much work. So, so in light of not being able to pass my scheme, I had this great idea that I would do something different. And I had some other friends, because I still was actively involved in drugs. I could. Everybody then was kind of going into counseling. I had already started school. Actually, it was Washington Tech at the time and Federal City later. They had closed DC Teachers College.
Around what time was this? Around what years?
This was 70, around 1970, 71.
Okay,
Right around
so
that
you're
area.
saying this is the time where people are now starting to go into counseling. They're starting to understand this field
And social work,
and
yes.
social work
Yes.
and how we can deal with human behavior and social
Yes.
development.
Yes. And I guess to step back a bit further,
Uh-huh.
during my teen years, it was the beginning of the surge of civil rights and the onset of the Panther Party. And in fact, the first chapter actually started at my mom's house. I had someone from California came there. Yeah, I was a rebel. I kind of grew up a rebel. So I was resistant to a lot of things right from the very onset. And so this counterculture thing, I just kind of stayed with it all along the way. Up in Washington Tech, I was the first student president and had to write the Constitution and stuff. So I was getting accolades the entire time, but I really didn't require any effort. I didn't feel challenged. So I just kind of squandered around. Like I said, I had the job, then I didn't have it. So I decided to start doing this counseling thing at PG Health Department. And it was, it turned out to be a gateway because people that were coming there for heroin treatment, I was an intake worker, and just by checking them in and befriending them, they provided me with drugs.
Wait a minute. Just because you were working at this area,
Yes, and they kind of knew me. You kind of know everybody.
right?
You have a subculture,
Right.
so people
But
know
you're
you.
supposed to be helping them to get off drugs.
Yes, and they would come in and being late and stuff like that, so I could do them favors. They late and the door's supposed to be closed, so I could allow them in. So I had some leverage. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it was kind of like an ongoing joke. So I did that for a while, and then because I really liked what I was doing, as far as I was only doing intake initially. I got an offer to do some counseling with emotionally disturbed children,
Okay.
which I really enjoyed, but I still had not completed any formal training. So there was always this glass ceiling. I could only go so far. I could kind of doing, it was like a paraprofessional job. So I kind of continued staying in that field of work until I got a job with DC government, and there was a facility as far as Haven, and it was working with severe to profound retarded citizens. And I worked there for a while, and after working there, I got another job offer to go over to St. Elizabeth Hospital.
Okay. Okay.
And at St. Elizabeth Hospital, that's where I guess my addiction really kind of became like full blown. Up until that point, it was always maybe just weekends. But going to St. Elizabeth, there were I had a number of friends and colleagues that worked there, and that was like what everybody did. Working in maximum security. Yes, I had actually done the intake on Hinckley when he came in.
Really?
Yeah. So this has been like a long path with me. I enrolled in school because now I had a government job. They had an upper mobility program, and I always wanted. This was something else. One of the first things that I found that addiction does, it kind of steals your ambition. First thing to go is your ambition. So I had always wanted to complete college, and I had an opportunity with the upper mobility program to return to school. I did that, and I enrolled at American University. And
Now, I'm sorry. I have a question for you at this
Sure.
point. Was there a point at all while you're going through this journey that you say, I don't want to do drugs anymore, or you think that there's something that will help you not become like those people that you're doing the intake for, or is there something that you feel will help you go this far but no further?
well, I think
I know I asked you two questions,
Yeah.
really, but
the short answer is basically as addiction progresses, you don't necessarily identify in, you identify out.
And can you explain that?
Yes, when I say identify out is even though you can see people that are actively addicted and going through things, because in my head, I haven't experienced that. I don't see myself in the same manner. That's for them. As I said, I went to school, and my thinking was that if I learn more about addiction, then it would make me immune to really becoming fully addicted. So it's this whole thing about denial and how we perceive ourselves, which is a driving point for addiction. Addiction, probably denial is the driving force, and the more intelligent you are, that's the principle that denial feeds off of. The most difficult people to recover are high performing folks, doctors, lawyers, nurses, people that are very educated. They are the last to really get it, because in their way of thinking, the very dynamic you were raising the question, they don't see themselves in that way. I still have, I have a license, I have a job,
Right.
I have respect.
Right.
They still have those things, even though they're living double, but they don't see themselves in the same manner. So their success rate of really recovering is far less than people that just everyday people, like blue collar workers. In fact, I can remember being in treatment one time, and this guy told me, he said, "You know what? I've never seen anybody too dumb to get this, but I've seen a lot of people that were too smart, and you're one of them." And shortly after that, I left that treatment facility because I didn't like the way he was talking to me. I thought I knew better. I just wanted a designer program, something that just fit me. I didn't see myself like everybody else because I was able to, still have the job and, all those things, all the
Still
trappings.
functional.
Yeah.
Well, to a point.
Yeah, people, and even that term, a functional addict is kind of questionable. It's a matter of progression, how far you've gone. And because it's everything is kind of scaled in a manner, and the longer you do something, the more you progress. So even though you may have the capacity to earn more, it kind of postpones some of the other consequences. But as time goes on, you come face to face with with your own I guess your own personal challenges. You hear people talking about hitting the bottom, as far as addiction.
Yeah.
And I always tell folks that I'm working with that, people ask about the bottom or a high bottom or a low bottom, people that haven't really lost a lot. My response is, you hit your bottom once you stop digging. In other words, if you continue to go on and on, you'll take a chance at recovery. You may have a period where you kind of stop using, but as soon as you start using again, you kind of pick up where you left off. So until you stop actually doing, engaging in the self-defeating behavior, you continue to kind of go further and further. Right when you say you've lost everything, you really haven't, because as long as you're still breathing, as long as you still have another day, you get the same choice to make, either I'm going to do it or I'm not going to do it. But a lot of it has to do with insight. I'm a big believer that the more awareness people have, it increases their chances of recovery. That tapped with their internal motivation. It's the external things really don't mean that much, because the external things, when we start talking about decision making, and the brain and the frontal cortex and stuff like that, because addiction is really a brain disease, and we talk about a hijacked brain.
Yes. Yes.
So initially, it's supposed to be top down control.
Right.
But as you develop an addiction, it's no longer top down; it's bottom up. And we start looking at the neurochemistry of addiction and how that plays out. So, as I said, I was going to school thinking that if I learned about neurotransmitters, if I understood how the body metabolizes and excretes drugs.
I love it.
Yeah. That was my approach.
That would be your vaccine.
Yes, yes. And I can remember actively using and explaining all these dynamics to folks. They didn't want to hear that. They did not want to hear that. And they were saying, "You're so smart. Why can't you just stop using?" And the truth of the matter was that just knowing that was not enough. I didn't know enough about personal development, self-discovery. Those are the kind of things that move you, away from the addiction, because you have to first find out, what are the root causes. And generally, I'm a big believer that pain and the whole despair piece has a lot to do with how people develop their coping strategies. Because the one thing about drugs is they definitely change the way we feel.
Can you expound on that just a little bit more? You said pain and our coping strategies.
Yeah. Okay. When you are under influence, the euphoric effect that you feel, the good feeling with drugs, that's everybody can enjoy that. Even from children, from childhood, we're always trying to alter consciousness. Children spin themselves around, hold their breath, because they like, the altered consciousness. If you're going through something, some kind of despair, the dysphoria, you want to get away from that. We always want to eliminate that. If you happen to try some drugs, that a lot of times people tell you you're not feeling good, take this, take that. It's a drug-oriented society, and we also in this age where we want everything to happen right now, as opposed to kind of working through it. So there are all kind of variables that kind of contribute to our turning to something. If you have a headache, take this. Even the way they advertise it, quick relief. We talk about quick relief.
Yes.
So just looking at it from that standpoint, we're always looking for that quick fix. So if you are going through something, you take this drug, and you'll find that it definitely changes the way you feel. It doesn't change anything about your situation and your circumstances, but at least you have some temporary relief. And what happens in that process, your brain chemistry is being altered. You're becoming more and more dependent because your circumstances are becoming worse and worse. So you're feeling worse and worse, and you're relying on the drugs more and more.
Okay, I think this is a perfect time to do this. We recorded an episode with a young lady that talked about her cocaine addiction. And we're going to circle back to another part of your story. I'm going to remember this, but
Certainly.
I want to insert this here. She told us a little snippet about chasing that first high. I want you to listen to her explain that, and I want you to give us your take on what she's talking about from the neuroscience part of it, or the
Certainly.
addiction part of it.
Snorting cocaine, and they asked me did I want to do it, and I said okay, and I took they call it a toot, when you draw a line and then you snort it.
Okay.
And I did, and I didn't like the feeling because it drained down in my ear. It caused my ear to ache. So I didn't like it, and we left. And so the next week, it was the same thing. So I went with her, and they were doing it a different way. They were smoking it, and I took a smoke, and that was a different feeling than from the actual tooting. And so I winded up spending all my money on crack cocaine. I'll never forget the day I went home and I didn't have any money to buy any food for my kids. So that was the beginning of it. And I continued to go back with her, and then we started purchasing it and bringing it to the house, smoking it. And I did that for a good little while until one day I was in my bedroom, and there was a big mirror in my room, and I got up and I happened to look at myself, and I probably weighed like 125 pounds.
What?
That's when I knew then that I was gone. I had went too far.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect place for me to ask this, because I was wondering, is there a moment where you know?
Yes, that was my moment.
Okay.
But it wasn't enough to make me stop.
Huh. Why not?
Because at that point, I began to like it. I just didn't like what it was doing to me, but I couldn't quit.
You liked what about it?
I liked the feeling. I liked the high that it gave me. You know, it just, it wasn't a long high. It was a high that only lasts enough to make you want more.
Wow.
It didn't last long, but it gave you that feeling, that even a taste that you wanted to taste, you wanted another one and another one and another one and another one. And it never was enough.
So when you say it, you just wanted to do another one, were you chasing a particular feeling, or were you just wanting to stay in a certain state? Were you ever able to go back to that point that you were chasing?
No.
I guess I should be my question.
No, you wasn't. You mean, do you ever get that feeling that you did the first time?
Yes.
No, you never get it. That's what you're chasing. You're chasing that high, that feeling of the first time you ever took a hit. I mean, it just was a good feeling, but you never get it again. It's almost like you're not satisfied anymore. It doesn't satisfy you, so it just keep you chasing it over and over and over, all day, all night, until, if you have any money, every dime you get is gone, and you can smoke all day and never get that feeling again.
Really?
Yes.
So is she explaining in what I would say just how it would look every day as to the physiology or the neurochemistry that you just started touching on, and if you could help us understand what's going on?
Yes, she that the whole thing about chasing the ghost, I guess the feeling is so intense. And again, when we start talking about brain chemistry and we start talking about neuro-linguistic programming, where we have neural pathways that remember the reward, that's there. We are built to remember the reward part, because that's how our whole survival is based on rewards, things that we need to remember. The dopamine that everybody is always talking about is the neurotransmitter that kind of prompts us to do things. It teaches us to do things. Then we have another neurotransmitter that people don't talk a lot about, which the glutamate, which help us to remember it. You know, it's a two-prong action, and that's how the old part of the brain, which is responsible for our survival, that's the part, that's where the reward system is, that's where it develops this loop. And once that is engaged with the intensity that you get from the high, it's going to be calling for it. And it requires something very, very severe to kind of happen, to take place in order for us to kind of do better. An example that probably I saw this demonstration. There was a doctor that had been formerly addicted, and his argument was, as being a medical doctor, he himself didn't believe addiction to be a disease. Okay, but through his study, he later on found out that it is a brain disease, but it's a disease of choice. We cannot make the right decision based on the way we are wired.
Wow, this is a disease of decision.
It's a disease of choice, yes.
A disease of choice.
Yes.
So we cannot make the right decision at the time.
Absolutely. Because that loop that we're in, the survival loop, it's made for us to stay safe for the next 15 seconds. And because the drug rush is that intense and hijacked, for the next 15 seconds, I know that if I get this, I'll be fine. I'll figure it out later. I'll figure it out later. Or the consequences don't seem that severe. He used a demonstration where he actually has a, he said in like an Old West scene where you have a saloon and there's an alcoholic there, and he comes up and offers the alcoholic a drink. And of course, he gets ready to take it, and he says, "There's one catch. If you take that drink, I'm going to blow your brain out." So right then, initially, he may pause and not drink. Or you have some folks, and anybody that's been seriously addicted for a long period of time, you have to wonder, is he really going to pull the trigger? Oh, I wonder if I can get the drink down before the bullet kind of crushing through my brain. So even though we can kind of postpone it by some external measures for the moment, soon, that threat, as soon as that threat is removed, then it's not that important anymore.
Wow.
So, and even when you look at some of the research now, when they do the brain mapping, you can kind of see for yourself. So, there are people that I counsel on a regular basis that don't want to believe that they have a brain disease. Wow. It's no different than having diabetes or hypertension, and probably 1 in 10 people will become addicted. They're predisposed. There are different components of this disease, and what happens is we want to compartmentalize various things. That's the way we're taught to learn. But really, there are several different components to this, and where one person may be weak in 3 of them, 3 of the 5, there are other folks that may be weak in all 5. So I thought the study of addiction, because everybody had their own particular theory, and they want to defend this and say this is the only way.
Right.
Nobody is really looking at the bigger picture about how vast this is. And I always use the analogy of water going down the drain. How initially the spiral is very wide and it's slow, but as water goes out the tank, the spiral gets faster, stronger, and smaller.
Yes.
And pretty soon it's like this. People kind of come in on addiction maybe anywhere along that continuum, but at some point, the longer you're on, that spiral gets faster, and smaller till it's going down the drain.
Wow. Before we sat down to start talking, you had shared with me that you have a master's, I think it's a master's in human services.
Yes.
And you said that you've come to this area of addiction specialist in recovery and counseling because of your own journey over 35 years with addiction.
Yes.
And so now at this time, can I explain to our community what you do? How do you, now that you're on this side of things, what is your role in somebody's life?
I believe, well, first of all, I've been the director for a couple of mental health programs in addition to substance abuse. It kind of started off with substance abuse, but once you enter the arena of substance abuse, you find that there's always at least 2 other chronic ailments. Most of the time is at least 2 chronic ailments kind of go along because people postpone their health. So I'm also I spent 5 years working with Women Walker Clinic. So as far as HIV and AIDS, I'm very knowledgeable about HIV and AIDS. But now the approach is integrated care and co-occurring disorders. I actually do trainings, help facilitate trainings in Department of Behavioral Health, and I do drugs of choice and screening. Those are 2 areas that I facilitate in teaching professionals, about addiction and what kind of things are important, because it is stunning, it's shocking, in fact, how little training physicians have on addiction.
Yes. Oh, we don't get
psychiatry.
Yes, no.
And those are key.
Very key. I remember when I was in medical school, there were 2 areas that we received very little training in. One was nutrition, and the other one was addiction.
Yes.
And it's so funny that those two areas, though, play such a big role in everyday life.
Absolutely.
And we're just taught to basically manage chronic disease. That's
Yeah.
what we're taught.
Yes, and it's the causal model as opposed to looking at historically how the disease develops and stuff.
Yes.
The causal model, you have a ailment, it needs to be addressed, and these are the symptoms. And doctors don't chase symptoms; they just simply address what the cause is.
Yes.
But they have not with addiction because of their error in judgment and how it was perceived initially about it being.
Yes.
Having impaired values and stuff like that, because they realize that even though the frontal brain has a lot of the decision making, they had no concept of the hijacked brain.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think as time go on and more people become aware of this, it will be beneficial to everyone. But I think I kind of digressed. We were
That's
talking
okay.
about something, and I just want to kind of get to
Yes.
that point.
Go ahead.
But I don't remember what the point was.
That's okay.
So
And
help
that's what
me
I
out.
love about podcasting is that this is no appointment needed, and we can
Okay.
have our chance to make the points that we would like to make. And we'll probably come back to that. I think both of us were trying to make sure that we put in all of our points. You made a point about integrative care. I love that terminology, integrative care.
Yes.
That you use now. And I was listening to another podcast on Radiolab. It's through NPR, and they had a show on called The Fix, and they were talking about addiction. And they started talking about the use of pharmaceuticals along with therapy, along with the behavioral side of it, and how it's not widely used a lot. That there are some pharmaceuticals that were approved by the FDA as early as 1994 to help with even like alcoholism and those type of addictions. What are your thoughts on using pharmaceuticals along with some type of behavior or cognitive therapy?
Well, I think that it's and part of my expression, but it's a necessary evil.
Mm-hmm.
I think MAT, medically assisted therapy, is great. I actually work with a Suboxone program, which is a partial agonist, unlike methadone, and they've taken some precautions with Suboxone to kind of make sure that it doesn't travel the same way that methadone went. In fact, there's someone that I would introduce you to, and he is kind of taking the lead on making sure that consumers that have long-term opiate dependence receive Suboxone, because the whole thing with addiction treatment now is with managed care, it's changed the landscape. Everything has to be approved, and you have people that have no knowledge of the ailment that's making decisions about who can get what. Dr. Chapman, Edwin Chapman, he's on Benning Road. He has private practice, has been there for 30 years, has taken healthcare finance to task along with several of the MCOs, and making certain that they do their responsible thing with people that are trying to get opiate addicted treatment.
Wow.
Because they want to put a cap on how much medication a person can get. And these are people that aren't even physicians. And that's a whole nother thing. And I don't want to go too far over there. But with the integrative care, let me just say this. As I said, when you start looking at people that are opiate dependent, frequently they have at least one or two other chronic ailments.
Okay.
The integrative care model, and I kind of work with Department of Behavioral Health on integrated care. They look at the behavioral health, the physical health, and the substance abuse. And the theory is that there's no wrong door. Wherever people come in, we need to be able to treat them for all their ailments.
That is nice.
They even have the you're probably familiar with the medical home, but now they have what they're calling the health home, which simply means that you have a virtual office that when a person comes in, you screen them for all these things, and any of the things that they need, any kind of services they need, they're being managed under one roof,
Wow.
or at least directed by from one location.
So it's all very concise. They don't. It's not dismembered. They're not.
That's what they're trying to resolve. But even in their efforts, because of the limited time and planning, and because the cultural leg, how we practice medicine and care, it takes a while. It's like, pulling a cart.
Yes. Yes.
And people don't change very fast. And that's the same thing with addiction. Change is difficult for people. Period. Yes.
Yes, I think I believe I know which point you wanted to come back to. We were talking about the neurotransmitters and how they how the neural tracks and the neuronal response reward, and how we are wired for reward. And so we had started talking about this reward pathway and the
Yes.
neural pathway,
Yes.
and the neurotransmitters that are released. That's why when, like you said, from young, we do things so that we can feel this sense of euphoria,
Yes.
so that we can have a reward. And that is what is hijacked when you become addicted to certain substances.
Absolutely. And the whole term about homeostasis and how our body is always trying to maintain homeostasis. And when we take some additive, something outside of ourselves, and the other thing is this: drugs generally mimic or they resemble something that the body's already kind of manufacturing of its own.
Yes.
So when you take that, you either inhibiting something or you exciting something. That's how we get the effect. I think that, and this is just my own pet peeve, in treatment, one of the areas that they're really overlooking, and because, again, we have limited resources while people are being cared for, is their diet. I used to work for, years ago, RAP. Ron Clark was a visionary. He was the first one that had holistic approach to addiction in this city anyway. And what he had done, he placed people on transitional vegetarian diets. There was no bleach sugar used. Yes, their diets were restricted. They took herbal remedies for certain things, for cleansing and stuff. So he had his thumb on the pulse, and along with the cultural component as well, about how we feel about ourselves as people. That kind of prompted people to use drugs again. But again, our diet has a lot to do with how, there are more neurotransmitters in our stomach than in our brain.
Yes.
People don't realize that.
Yes.
So our diet has to be important, but we haven't even gotten there yet. So these are just some things that need to be looked at. And I've kind of been all over the place, but it's kind of hard to narrow things down, and maybe I should probably script some of this and just do it in a presentation. But
no, this is quite fine. This is what we want. We want just the ability to listen in on a conversation.
Certainly.
Because I have found that with sitting around dining room tables, with sitting after having a meal with family, friends, or sitting around, that these conversations come up and they meander through so many different ways.
Yes.
And it's when we sit down and start having these conversations, these types of conversations, we can then sit back and we can connect our own dots.
Okay.
And you have definitely touched on different areas that I would love for us to touch on for the community, so that they can then see, wow, this is more than just, oh, they just can't pull it together. Or they're just, sorry, excuse me. Hold on. Okay. Or they just don't have enough faith to get over it. All you need to do, honey, is pray about that, and you'll get the victory. I believe that there's a place for that. I also believe that we need to look at a whole picture and begin to understand, like you said, this is a brain disease, that there is real physiology that's going on, and we need to start looking at ourselves as a whole person. And this conversation has been exactly that.
Yes, and the spiritual, I want to definitely add this, the spiritual component is vital. We have to find something to believe, because one thing for certain, I started out saying that one of the first things that addiction takes is your ambition. If we don't believe that there's some hope, if we don't believe that there's some force or some power or some ability to get beyond where we are, if we can't begin to believe that our future has to be much better than our past, then it's kind of all for naught. But and what I've noticed is that usually the spirituality part is one of the first things that go in addiction, and probably one of the last things to kind of come back, because people have to stabilize themselves first. Because when you look at Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, there are certain things that just have to be in place. The social determinants that go along with addiction have to be addressed, and it's difficult to talk somebody into trying to stop using when you're still worried about where am I going to stay, what am I going to eat, what are people going to think about me. Those are all real things that people have to address. So again, the holistic approach is vital.
Wow. Mr. Moore, I have truly enjoyed this conversation, and we would be honored for you to come back to sit down in the community, and we'll pick out a particular topic for you to engage us with, and we'll be able to sit down. I'm working on a panel discussion, so I would love for you to be able to come back and be a part of that.
I'd be delighted to.
Before you leave, we usually give our community a tip of the day from our guest that comes to sit down, and it can be any tip of the day. It can be something from the topic we're talking about, or something else that just comes in, or that touches your heart, anything at all.
Well, when I was talking about, the drug use and the pain that's involved, Khalil Gibran said that pain cracks the shell that encapsulate our heart. So that's the one thing that we have to realize, that beneath all use, I'm a firm believer that there's a lot of pain that needs to be addressed. So when you see somebody that's actively using, rather than just kind of judging them, just try to find out what their pain is, what's their source of pain. I think it'd be a helpful approach.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
And with that, community, we'll see you back here next time. Bye now.